Good morning. Thank you for joining us today. You are watching KUHS, the stream on Malady Drive, and this is the Weekend Boost. I am your host, Paul Lane, and we are so grateful to have you. Happy New Year to you all. This is our first show of the new year, and we're so excited today. We have a guest, Virginia Sanchez. She's been a past guest, but she's got a book out that I saw her at a Kalama organization, and you know, those of you who watch the program regularly know that I support Kalama. That's the Colorado Alliance for Latino Mentors and Authors, and I was able to run into Virginia about this latest book, and so we're going to be talking to her today about that. As normal, we're going to go talk about some past guests that we've had on the show. Manuel Ramos, the first Latino inducted into the Authors Hall of Fame in Colorado, wrote the book Angels in the Wind. By the way, this is his 11th novel, so find out about Manuel Ramos and look him up. Arturo Jimenez wrote this book, Dreamer's Nightmare, the U.S. War on Immigrant Latinx Children. Guys, I'll tell you what, these are some awesome pieces of literature that will just open your eyes and change the way you think of all the people coming in from the border at the north and so many other things. I am the author of The Caregiver's Handbook, a self-help love story, and you can get any of these books through the station. You can contact us over here. And our official show sponsor is David Ronquillo, also a member of Kalama, wrote the book Make It Go Away. By the way, this is a part of a trilogy, and David has done a lot of work to put these books together. Make It Go Away, when you hear the term and how he came up with the title of this book, it's a very interesting subject. But David's book, Make It Go Away, is again a part of a trilogy. His third book is soon to be introduced. Now, I am so excited about having our guest today, Virginia, because I am from KUHS, which is Walsenburg, Colorado. I was born there. My mom was born there. My grandparents were both born and raised there. And so this is very near and dear to my heart. In fact, when I was looking through some of the pictures, I saw some people that were most likely ancestors of mine. And so she wrote this book, Pleas and Petitions, Hispano Culture and Legislative Conflict in Territorial Colorado. I love this book, guys. I'll tell you what, it is. I always say that, you know, the thing that really gets me is how they came to the shape of Colorado was explained in this book. But it talks about so many things that are just of so much relevance in today's society. We talk about oppressed cultures. We talk about political strategies. We talk about, just colonization and so much more, all in this book. The book that we're going to be talking about today is The Forgotten Curacheños of the Lower Valley. Now, I got to say that I've learned so much just reading this book, and I mean just the culture that was in southern Colorado, even at the beginning of its statehood, and the different nationalities that were present there. Virginia, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Wonderful. Tell me a little bit, what made you decide to write this book, The Forgotten Cuchareños?
Okay, well, Cuchareño is a person from Cucharas, and Cucharas is it no longer exists, but it was a settlement that was about 8 miles northeast of Walsenburg in Orfano County, Colorado. Now, if you follow Highway 40, about 8 miles, then you'll see a lot of land there, and that was Cucharas. My book also has a map in it of what it looked like before, as far as what the streets were. And you asked me about how I got started in writing this book. Well, I've always been interested in Colorado history and New Mexico history, obviously, because my roots go back there 16 generations in New Mexico. And I actually grew up in Wyoming, which is very different. But anyway, after World War II, men from northern New Mexico and southern Colorado returned from the war but could not find any jobs. And so they looked north to the railroad in Wyoming. So all along the I-80 corridor, from Cheyenne to Rock Springs, you'll find lots of people who have roots in New Mexico and southern Colorado. And so we'd go to New Mexico quite frequently when I was younger. and going up and down the I-25 corridor to get to New Mexico, the Mora Valley. I just wonder, well, why is everything so familiar to me? Like in southern Colorado is like northern New Mexico. So anyway, I won't tell you that story, but that's for you to read in my book, Pleas and Petitions. And but I want to answer your question. So my husband is from Denver, but his roots go back to Orfano County and the San Luis Valley and northern New Mexico. So, it's that migration where you come around and over. And my mother-in-law was looking through the drawer while we were visiting one day. She found in her drawer an acequia ledger. An acequia is an irrigation ditch. And this ledger had all of the farmers' names. So these are the parciantes, those irrigators who actually have permitted access to get water from the acequia, which is, again, the irrigation ditch. And so I was just fascinated by this book. I mean, it was a treasure. It was all written in Spanish, and I can read Spanish and speak some. So I enjoyed just going through the names and trying to read the bylaws that were going through, that were also in this book. And from that, I started doing the genealogies of the people that were in there, and that's what made this story of Forgotten Cuchareños really exciting, because these people were pioneers. They were go-getters. An irrigation ditch was a hand-dug ditch, so it wasn't easy to move water from the river to get it to your fields. But that's the way it was in southern Colorado and in New Mexico. That's how they moved the water, and that's how the Pueblo Indians had done it. So very interesting history that we all need to know about. And just ask your parents about southern Colorado history, and ask them about the irrigation ditches, and they'll tell you, that's how generations were built, because you went out and you helped on cleaning the irrigation ditch every spring to make sure that the water flowed freely into your fields. And if you didn't get the water freely flowing into your fields, then you had no crops. So this is very important to the people. So anyway, I did the genealogy on the people, and I started interviewing some families that were from Cucharas, and lo and behold, these people were great. Janice Martinez and Sylvia Brando shared lots of photos with me, and the Helen Cisneros Vigil family, tremendous photos that really made this story come alive, and that's what you saw in the book. So I hope I answered that question.
Yes, absolutely. It's interesting because I do have some distant relatives, Trujillos, that were, in the lower valley, and they moved to Rock Springs, Wyoming, and so I have relatives that are still there in Wyoming area. So when you said that, it really, it hit home for me, because that's exactly what's happened in portions of my own.
And a lot of these stories don't get passed down, but yeah, the guys came back from World War II, serving in World War II, and had hard times trying to find jobs. So like their fathers and grandfathers who left the villages to do sheep shearing and sheep herding and beet tilling and all of that, farm crops. Times were hard, and they left their farms up to the family, the wife and the kids, to keep that part of it coming. But they'd come back when it was needed during the springtime to clean the irrigation ditches, and it was a shared community. People helped each other, and it was mutual survival.
Now, Cucharas was actually a town at one time, which is no longer in existence. It's so interesting because I posted it on Facebook, and one of my cousins that I found through Facebook said, there still is a place called Cucharas, and yes, there is, but it's not the town that it was once.
well, there is still a Cucharas. There's two valleys, okay? There's the upper valley and the lower valley.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the Cucharas that I'm talking about in my book is the lower valley. The upper Cucharas is going up toward La Veta.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I got you.
All right. Yeah.
So that's why when you go through Walsenburg, you see Cucharas on the outside of town, but it was actually not, that was not the
That's
town.
the wrong one. That's the
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I was reading, there was a post office there, which really made it, declared it a town. Post office is kind of the hallmark, and
I was just going to say, more importantly, before the post office was the road that traveled right through Cucharas.
Hmm.
So it was the Denver Sanitary Road.
Wow.
And so I was actually able to find that there was a stage stop. The Bustos family ran a stage stop at Cucharas, and what was called the Mexican ditch ran underneath a bridge there.
Wow.
But these guys were the stage tenders, which actually took the horses off of the stage and took care of the horses, and this was for the they would care for the horses, and then they'd get a fresh set of horses and put them back on the stage. And sometimes, travelers would come inside to the house, and La Señorita would feed them and offer hospitality. But, prior to my book, the stage stop did not exist on Colorado maps, which is very, very unfortunate.
Oh, wow.
But it does now.
Wow. Yeah, that's so interesting. I remember going when I was working in the utility company years ago, and we were over there about 1300 South Logan, and right in there was a stagecoach stop. And it's until you see history like that, history is a concept. It really doesn't hit home. And the last time I went through Southern Colorado, I thought of you because I remember just so many things about La Veta and
The vein.
the vein.
It's actually, the vein, which is La Veta, and now we pronounce it La Vida.
La Vida, yes, yes. And so it's really so cool. It's like seeing the Liberty Bell for the first time. It's all of a sudden, wow, there really is,
Yes, it really does exist.
And then as I started reading your book, and I realized that Walsenburg was not named Walsenburg, it was La Plaza de los Leones.
That's right, La Plaza de los Leones, named for the Leon family who settled there. And I have to remember that Cucharas was settled in the 1860s, the mid-1860s.
Mm.
So La Plaza de los Leones was settled earlier. And Cucharas became the big stop because of the stagecoach and the road that ran past there. Then La Plaza de los Leones, in comes Fred Walson, and he starts making some changes. Of course, he's got a little bit of moolah, and he does some deals with the DNR railroad that comes through, and so he makes a name for himself. And lo and behold, Walsenburg gets changed, or La Plaza de los Leones gets changed to Walsenburg. And people have told me, no, they're two different areas. And I come back and say, wait a minute, La Plaza de los Leones was the parent town of the settlements that were there. That makes it very important. And when Walsen came, he may have made his house down the street or something and called it Walsen, but no, it's still the parent site of those settlements there. So La Plaza de los Leones is the original name.
Wow. Now,
And it could have been changed to simply Leones, but no, it had to be named for a certain name, unfortunately.
Yeah, I've always thought about that ever since my childhood. How could what a name, Walsenburg. I mean, I agree. I would think like, a Spanish name would be more fitting and more appropriate for it.
Yes, anything south of Pueblo used to be of Spanish domain,
Yes.
and then later of Mexican domain in 1848 under U.S. occupation after the U.S. war with Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
So, southern Colorado, anything south of Pueblo looks like New Mexico. And as I discuss in my book, Pleas and Petitions, it it was northern New Mexico, and it was taken to create the Colorado Territory.
Mm-hmm.
So one day, 7,000 Nuevo Mexicanos woke up, and all of a sudden they're in a new territory. That's an English-speaking territory.
Mm-hmm.
So everything's changed for them. But I won't give those little bits away.
Those details. Man, I think about it. I think about my ancestors going to bed one night and waking up the next day, and all of a sudden all of their compadres, they say, no, you no estás mexicano. And the Americans said, you're not American. And so my ancestors that were from there became a people without a country.
Well, think about the name of the ditch I mentioned. Okay, the Bustos property was right there, and the stagecoach traveled over the bridge, and under the bridge ran the Mexican ditch. Well, how on earth did it get named the Mexican ditch? Come on now.
Mm-hmm.
We know.
Yep.
We know why.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Other ditches were named for the man, the man or the mayordomo who actually helped construct the ditch and lead the construction of the ditch, like the Madrid ditch or the Bustos ditch. But no, this one happens to be the Mexican ditch.
Yes, that's so cool. It's kind of cool, but it's also it's saddened me because, you know, there were so many people who lived there, and they were, like the title of the book says, forgotten. You know, they were minimized. They were basically erased from history, and you know, and then its place was left a town called Walsenburg. And you know, you read about a lot of bodegas, a lot of the sheep herders. There was a lot of sheep herders in that area, and they were kind of pushed out by cattle farmers, rich cattle ranchers.
Right. There was a widow who had 1,500 sheep, and there was a lot of sheep. And some of the Hispanos in Cucharas were very wealthy. I mean, they gave land to the archbishop so that he could build a church in Cucharas, and also he loaned thousands of dollars to the archbishop so that they could rebuild the church in Walsenburg. And this loan, I don't remember the exact amount, but the loan actually was actually forgotten, and he just, you know, had given the land.
It was gifted.
So it was a gift.
Wow. And as time passed, and these, I'm guessing they were, you know, probably maybe Texans, but you know, they came in and they were very wealthy. These cattle ranchers, and they started putting in fence lines. They put fence lines in, and they were artificial property lines that eventually became the official property line. And
when we lost a lot of land, even when the DNRG came in, there was a man who had owned property, prime property, right where the railroad was going to come in. And some shenanigans were made so that, I'll give you this much for your property. It's really a good price, blah, blah, blah. And of course, you start flashing dollar bills in front of somebody's face.
Yes.
But, so anyway, he sold the land. The very next day, the same person who signed the paper making Cucharas a post office sold the land to the DNRG, and it was made a right of way. So, unfortunately, the Hispanic who had previously owned that land was on some prime land, and a lot of people from Cucharas didn't know what it meant to have the railroad coming through and purchasing the land.
Wow.
And so it was unfortunate. I think they were predominant Spanish speakers, and the ledger that I was first talking about was all in Spanish. So they retained their heritage, their language, and their traditions, which is nice, which is really good, and which is really important. Unfortunately, there was no newspaper for them that would tell them about the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad and what it meant, and why keeping the property would be really important. And the same thing happened with coal mines. People purchased property because they found out there was coal.
Yep. My grandfather was a coal miner, and he, in Walsenburg, and I don't know if he went to Trinidad to the mine or if there was a mine in Walsenburg, but so when you say that, it rings very...
The Walsen Mine.
Walsenburg.
It was outside of Walsenburg, but it was called the Walsen Mine.
Mm-hmm. I remember as a young boy learning about black lung, and the men who worked in those mines were very important, and the job they did was critical to survival, but they were not valued as employees or human beings even.
Mm-hmm. They brought in a lot of newly arrived immigrants to do the mines, just for that reason. They didn't want to do the work, so they let somebody else do it. A newcomer who really didn't know what the damage was going to be to their human life.
Their wealth, their health, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now there was quite a diverse population in that time. There were a lot of native people, and they called the Latino people Hispanos, and they mixed in pretty good. There was a lot of unity between the cultures, but at the same time there was conflict too. There was, I've read about the Santa Fe Trail, not in your book, but I often wonder, because they would go and kidnap people from other nations and bring them back and raise them and adopt them and Catholicize them and baptize them and give them a Christian name, and they would get a new term called criazo.
Criados, yes. I want to touch on a couple of things that you said along with that, and then I'll answer the question on the criados, okay?
Yes.
A lot of people wonder about the term Hispano versus Chicano versus whatever else that you want to call yourself. Okay, in my books, for the time period that they are covering, which is the territorial period, okay, 1861 to 1876, and then in New Mexico, the territorial period lasted up until statehood, which is in 1912. So, but during a certain time within that, people called themselves Hispano, okay? Now we're finding that we are mixed, and we have, a lot of people have already known that we were mixed, but, we are Hispano and Indio.
Yes.
Now, the thing that people have to also understand is when the Spanish first came in, they came in from the eastern side of Mexico, okay? And then they went up into Mexico City and then up to Zacatecas, followed north, past El Paso into New Mexico. So New Mexico was actually settled in 1588.
Wow.
That's a long time. And that is earlier than the eastern side of the United States was settled.
Wow.
For 7 years. Yes. Okay. So we lived our ancestors lived under the Spanish period up until 1821. That is when Mexico received its independence from Spain. So because we were under the Mexican flag, we call ourselves Mexican, and we're Mexican Americans. And some people still call themselves Spanish.
Yes.
But you have to remember, we were still under that Mexican flag for 25 years. Okay, and then, of course, then you have the territorial period when land is moved. A lot of land is moved to the United States after the war with Mexico in 1840. What started in 1846. Okay, so New Mexico in 1598, we have conflict with the indigenous groups that are there. Some of these indigenous groups, even the Pueblos, have conflict with other tribes, other nations. The Apache, the Comanche, the Arapaho, whatever, the Plains Indians. And you need to understand that part of history, because if you look at a map, it wouldn't have all of the counties and the state boundaries, but it would have tribes and nations that were there, and that would be filled. Okay. So we have to understand that there was trade and raid among those nations, as well as when the Spanish came in, there was raid and trade between the indigenous and the Spanish and later Mexican people. And so if you'd have trade, you go out on buffalo hunt, and you happen to meet a tribe that's there, and you do some trading. I mean, that's just the way it was. That's how you got some goods and blankets and robes and meat. And so trade was very important.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it went well, and sometimes it didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So when you had a raid, the raid was either on livestock, your sheep, your goats, your cattle, or sometimes children and women. Now, in raids, he wanted women of childbearing age, and of course, children, boys became sheep herders. Little girls learned how to cook and weave and do some other types of duties that were needed. When you are creating your farm and doing your crops, or you're trying to survive out on the plains with your nation, I'm talking about the two groups, it's survival. So you need laborers on a farm, and you need to build your tribe or your community within the indigenous tribe or group, band, so to speak, so that you can exist, so you can further live, further populate, further exist.
Exist, yes.
So I hope I kind of explained that in a nice way.
Certainly.
It hurt families, and so if a family is devastated because they lose some children in a raid, you're going to go back and you're going to try to get your children back as well as your livestock.
Mm-hmm.
So it was this raid and raid again and back raid, and then, so it was a rough frontier. It was a very, very difficult time.
No kidding.
Mm-hmm. Now, there were comancheros, and these comancheros would trade with the indigenous groups, and they would bring back captives. So these captives, again, as I mentioned, were women and children. Now, these comancheros would sell these women and children to Hispanos who wanted to purchase them. And once they were purchased, and Lafayette Head was the Indian agent at Conejos, in Conejos County, Colorado. All right, so in 1865, we've got the Civil War going on. This interesting. This history is so exciting and so interesting because, with the Civil War, we have the Emancipation Proclamation that says all slaves are free. All right, so the governor asks Lafayette Head, the Indian agent, to let him know how many Indians are held in captivity.
Captivity, yes.
Okay. So Lafayette Head makes this list, and it's about 147. So from that list, I started looking into, well, certainly this can't be all of it in southern Colorado. So I found 200 more that was both in Conejos and Costilla counties, the two counties that Lafayette Head enumerated.
Wow.
But I went into Huerfano County, Las Animas County, and anywhere else that I could find an enslaved person, an enslaved indigenous person in southern Colorado. So that's an interesting history. It's an interesting history. But once a captive, once an enslaved person, a captive person was brought into a Hispano family, the family took the child or the adult woman to the church, where they were baptized into the church and given a traditional Spanish name, Maria Josefa, or Jose de Jesus, or Juan Jose, or whatever. Now you have to remember that we see a lot of these names, Maria Josefa, or somebody starting with the name Maria or Jose or Juan, and those are saints' names.
Wow.
So that's the religious tradition that they were passing on to their children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's an important thing. The sad thing is that these indigenous enslaved persons lost their original names.
Their language, their culture, their customs. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. And not only did they lose that, they lost their language.
Mm-hmm.
They lost their heritage. They lost their traditions. And, that's kind of sad. But they didn't lose their memories. And these memories are of their families being killed in these raids. Mm-hmm. And being taken. And then, Louis Spohr later, he was a historian out of Buffalo County, Walsenburg. And he writes in his oral history that these captives were very well cared for, and they married into the family's children, and they married the children of the family, and they also were welcomed into the family. Now that's the good side. Some were, some were not. Mm-hmm. Some were held prisoner, because they tried to escape to go back to their tribe, mm-hmm. or their nation, or their band.
Yes.
And so then, there was bad treatment too. And some of the females that were brought into a family were raped by the owner or the sons of the owners. Mm. And so we have some sad stories there.
Yes.
And some owners and some sons married their cautivo, their criada.
Mm. Wow. Hey guys, before I forget, I just want to make sure and do a quick station break. You're watching KUHS The Stream on Malady Drive. This is the Weekend Boost. I am your host, Paul Lane, and our show sponsor is David Ronquillo. He wrote the book Make It Go Away. It is a part of a trilogy that we will be introducing in the weeks and months to come. Please make sure and get your hands on this book. It is a very good crime novel. It's definitely got some good twists in it, and definitely worth the read. We're talking to Virginia Sanchez, who is the author of the book Forgotten Cuchareños of the Lower Valley. And we're talking about, we were just talking about Lafayette Head, and Lafayette Head was the Indian agent that was in that area in Conejos, right? Conejos? Mm-hmm. And at one time they told him to go and account for all of these people, and there were some of these people that decided that they wanted to stay where they were. They gave them the opportunity to go back and be free, and some of them chose to stay there.
Right. Mm-hmm. Some chose to stay because they had children. Mm-hmm. By this time they had children, or by this time they were already married and had children, or they had established such a rapport with that family that they were comfortable. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
When I first... go ahead.
And they didn't know their other side. They didn't, they had lost their family, so who was their connection? Where would they find them?
Mm-hmm.
Those kinds of concerns.
Mm-hmm. So it's a very interesting dynamic that took place, and so I could see that there's internal conflict that must have been going on in the hearts of men and women who had that cultural rip or that cultural divide within themselves, and that native blood had to have been fighting with that Spanish blood within them, and I mean it metaphorically, but I can imagine that there's some conflict that was within a lot of these people's hearts.
Not during this period, no. No, because you remember, even in 1598, after 1598, when the Spanish came in, they started making these, started having the rapport with the Indians. I mean, this is how they survived in New Mexico for as long as they did, because they had, what's the word I want to use? They had a connection, through trade, and like I said, sometimes it was good, sometimes it was bad. Mm-hmm. But as you move, as the migration moved from central New Mexico, north, further north into what is now southern Colorado, we find that, southern Colorado, Colorado was the land of the Ute Indians.
The Ute.
Okay. All right. And so the Ute migrated and moved around and went into New Mexico, and a lot of people learned how to speak Ute. And we go back to the Hinisettles, okay? The Hinisettles were a group way back in the Spanish period where we needed buffer zones around New Mexico to make sure that there's no French incursion or incursion from the eastern states of the United States. All right. And these buffer zones are going to keep peace, so to speak. So if a tribe comes in, or a band comes in, or a nation comes in, an indigenous nation comes in, and they're trying to do a lot of raids, okay, it's this Hinisettles groups that would help keep the protection and keep them out or establish the protection. So now these Hinisettles were of different bands. So these were basically captives who were from the Arapaho, and then coming up with a lot of tribes, Cheyenne. So they were a mixed group.
Cherokee, Arapaho, Cheyenne.
Anyway, yeah. So these Hinisettles groups started expanding in population. So the Spanish government said, okay, I'm going to give you some land in Abiquiu, and I'm going to give you some land in different parts of New Mexico, because they wanted them separated for some reason. I guess it was just their only mission was to protect, but as they got bigger and bigger, it started to be a problem. So that's why the Spanish government wanted them to have their own piece of land. Okay. So these Hinisettles groups were important because they, again, are mixed indigenous DNA. Okay. And the interesting thing is, like, Abiquiu is a special area, and a lot of people know their ethnic history, their indigenous ethnic history. But when you come into southern Colorado, by 1825, they did not use the term Hinisettle anymore. The priests either used, identified the child on the baptism by their tribe if they knew it, or by, not tribe, but nation. So Ute, Arapaho, or I'm trying to think of some names.
Arapaho, Apache, Comanche?
Yeah. Yes, they knew it. Okay. And so we don't have a group of Native American heritage in southern Colorado because they all speak Spanish now. Right.
It's interesting. There was one point where they were more likely to speak Spanish or Ute than they were English. Certain people that were there. So it was a much different time, and it was a much more less colonized. I don't know the term I'm trying to find. It was a lot less
sparse. Yeah.
Yes, very very sparse. Yes, and so I can imagine that it was a very wild frontier.
Wild is right. Right. With American occupation, we have a lot of people new people from the east coming into southern Colorado and New Mexico. And they're not accustomed to our ways, okay? They're dressed in suits, we're still dressed in buckskin. And in 1861, when Colorado Territory was established, I mentioned that the 7,000 Nuevo Mexicanos found themselves one day in Colorado Territory.
Yes.
Now this is a big deal because they didn't get a voice. They did not get a vote. And the New Mexico delegates to Congress tried to tell the congressional leaders, please don't do this. Don't move these people because they are a unified group. They are part of New Mexico. They are of the same heritage, language, traditions, and culture. So, but it didn't happen. The people got no vote. Very sad. I think it's sad. But anyway.
In your book, Pleas and Petitions, you talk about how they would never provide translation, and they would give them a legal document, and there was no way for them to understand or translate or communicate their desires to not have these things happen, and yet they were just really just herded like cattle and really pushed into a culture that they had no idea that they were entering into.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Now, in 1861, we had the first territorial election that's held. Okay, so everybody gets to vote on their representatives to the territorial legislature. Conejos and Costilla County vote for two Spanish-speaking people, two Spanish-speaking men, because only men could vote at that time, to go to the legislature to represent them. Buffalo County was a Spanish-speaking county, a high population of Spanish-speaking people, and unfortunately, it didn't get to select a Hispano. So we only have two then going to the legislature. Now, once they get to the legislature, they find that there's no interpreter for them,
Wow.
which I find is very strange, because the new territorial governor, William Gilpin, was familiar with southern Colorado, and he knew they spoke Spanish, and he should have made preparations for them. But anyway, they didn't. 3 days later, they are scurrying around for a translator, and traditionally the translators were Anglos. So you have to think about that too. These Anglo translators had no idea about the custom and the tradition and the issues, especially the issues going on in southern Colorado. So they couldn't really provide any, I'll call it, support for the two Spanish-speaking legislators that they essentially worked for.
And even their translations were not always accurate. A lot of times they would change the translation to fit their own agendas.
Right.
Yeah, that was just terrible.
In one case, I think it was in the 1870s, one of the Hispano legislators asked for a new translator because the translator didn't keep him informed on what he needed to know, and that he was incompetent.
Mm-hmm.
So the Senate, because this was the legislator was actually a senator, and the Senate, one of the senators then said, well, the Senate needs to select the translator. It's the Senate's right to select the translator. They selected another Anglo.
Wow.
Yeah.
And the rest is history.
It would be okay if that Anglo translator knew about the issues and could help the legislator with what's going on, what's important, what's coming up the next day, and those types of things. But it doesn't seem like it happened that way.
Yeah. You can translate the language, but you can't translate the feeling. You can't translate the cultural values. You can't you can't translate much of the needed.
And the Spanish that was being spoken in northern New Mexico was very archaic Spanish. And some of these newcomers from the East who had taken Spanish were speaking a different dialect. So it was hard for them to understand these legislators, I think.
Wow. It almost makes you wonder if this was not by design. I don't want to get on a rant about oppression, but
it's about power.
It's about power. Yes. It was very intricately designed. In the end, if you look back, you realize that this was really about grabbing land. It was really about control. It was about
William Gilpin, the first territorial governor, right? He created the first Colorado Volunteers, which are the ones that went into Sand Creek and did the terrible massacre of
they became the 3rd Cavalry.
The peaceful Arapaho and Cheyenne.
Yes.
Okay, so anyway, the President of the United States says, no, William Gilpin, you're out. This is after 1 year, all right? The next year, William Gilpin was able to purchase all but 1/6 of the San Jose de Cristo land grant.
Man, oh man, we're hearing about that today, about these politicians getting stocks and getting, insider training, and there's a perfect example of what happens when you have powerful people in these decision-making positions, and it's
Yeah, that's why we need more people voting. We
Yes.
need more people to understand the issues and to get their vote.
Yes.
It's important. It's so important, and it's part of our civic responsibility to vote.
Yes, it is.
And
Every week I call out. Every time I get on the show, I call out for people to come forth and to stand up and be that hero. And hero, I use that term loosely because it's got some ego in it. But what I'm saying is this community, this state, we need people who represent, people who have
to represent our views.
Yes.
That's right. And that's why you really have to vote. You just
so important. It is so important.
If you don't, some things are going to be taken away. Some
Yes.
dollars are going to be taken away from a certain program, and that's a program that maybe you need and your community needs. So we need to start thinking more about our community
Yes.
and how we are part of that community.
Thank you.
And why our vote is important for our community.
Yep. So many people, they don't vote on school issues because they don't have children in school, but they don't realize that those children are our future. And those children, if they don't have a platform, if they don't have some kind of a structured education, they're going to be lost, and they're going to be these people who have no culture, just like what's happened in the past. And I'm with you, man.
In addition, we have to teach our children.
Yes.
We have to teach them and make sure that they're getting to bed on time. Make sure that they are reading. Take the electronics away and read a book.
Oh man, I'm totally with that.
A book. Read. It is so important. It is so important.
It was really important to me as a parent to raise critical thinkers. My mom told me, Hito, I'm a Democrat. And I'll always be a Democrat, but I don't want you to be a Democrat because I'm a Democrat. I want you to be whatever you affiliate yourself with because of your research, because of your critical thinking. And I believe that once we start really looking at the big picture and we start getting critical thinking, we start understanding that, yes, we need people in the State House. We need people in Congress and Senate.
Now, we have to remember that parties change. Sometimes in the past, a party is very right-wing, and sometimes in the past and in the future, the party changes to left-wing.
Yes.
I mean, it's just the views that change. So you just have to be really careful for who you're voting for. You just need to understand if they're going to represent your issues, your values, your community.
Yes, that's a good point. I appreciate that. And you're right. I mean, look at there was a party that was once called the Party of Lincoln, and I'm going to leave that right there. But views do change, and parties do change, and their perspectives and their values, and so we really do need to be aware, and we need to be constantly reading and researching and finding out for ourselves because
not everything you read on Facebook is true. Not everything you hear on certain
TikTok
platforms are true. Yeah. So open your eyes and get involved. We need more involvement. If we think of the past, when our ancestors were living out in those areas, they really worked together. I mean, they shared their crops, they shared their meat, they shared their what was good.
Their textiles, clothing, and you talked about sacks and how the metal.
If a person was in need, they stepped in and helped them. And we don't seem to do that anymore.
Yeah.
So I ask, do you know your neighbor? How well do you know your neighbor? Do you go in and check in on your neighbor?
You bet.
And especially our elderly. We need to take care of our elderly and ask them questions now, especially now, because There are libraries of information.
Oh man, I'll tell you, I've heard that quote about when an old person dies, the library is lost, and it is so true. I remember sitting at a table across from my aunt, who was my mom's sister, and she's been long gone, my Aunt Bernice, and she told me about when she was growing up and how her uncles had a still in Walsenburg. And I mean, it's like, oh my gosh, this is such a cool story, you know, during Prohibition. And
yes, how did they make it? You know,
yes.
And, you know, it's interesting because there's science involved.
Yeah, you know, you talk about, I'm just going to share this story because it's fascinating to me. My Aunt Bernice told me, she was my madrina, my godmother, and she told me a story about when she used to, her uncle used to give her a nickel for every Prince Philip can she would get, and that was a lot of money. And she would go all through Walsenburg collecting the Prince Philip's tins, you know, the tobacco tins, and then he would go in a room and he would do something for a whole day, and then he would go get a train into the city, and he'd come back with all kinds of money. Years later, when her kids were growing up and she smelled them smoking marijuana, she said, that's what my uncles used to smoke back in the 30s. And it's like, oh my gosh, you know, and we think this is all so new, and it's like this has been around for hundreds of years, you know, and I don't know what made me think of that, but it's like, it's so important for us to maintain and remember and capture and hold on to our culture, our history.
Well, you know, if you've got family history in New Mexico, go and visit the museums there. They're fascinating. You know, go and learn about your cultures and whatnot. It's just so fascinating.
Oh yeah. You know, in the book you talk about Aguas Calientes, and it's like, I know that place, you know, and there was Ojos Feliz, and there was, you know, so many little towns in Ocate, New Mexico, and all those just south of Walsenburg, Trinidad, and it's like, oh my gosh, I've heard of these tones, you know, all my life, you know.
Now, if you're from Walsenburg, or from Huerfano County, okay, because we're talking about Huerfano County today.
Yes.
If you're from Huerfano County, your family line likely came from the western side of the San Luis, San Diego Cristo Mountains into San Luis. Now what I'm saying is there's that migration from New Mexico. A lot of people came up north through Taos or through Abiquiu, okay, into southern Colorado. They were there for a while. They found out, okay, we're going to lose our land. We better find something else. They went over the San Diego Cristos into Huerfano County. So they're there by 1860. So if your heritage is in Huerfano County, you got to know and you got to understand that your family came from the San Luis Valley and from northern New Mexico. You've got history. You know, go to visit the San Luis Valley. See what it's all about. Go into New Mexico. Visit Taos. Go to the museums in Santa Fe. You know, just find out about your history and understand that your tradition, your family's traditions, your language is a part of you. It should be a part of you. It is a part of you.
It should be. Yeah, you know,
should value that.
It's so interesting that you say, you know, since 1598 the Spaniards had come there, and so it's no surprise that the Utes, the Cheyenne, the Arapaho, the Apache all spoke Spanish. You know, they were very fluent in Spanish, and
the Catholic missions.
And exactly, and that's exactly how they were indoctrinated and brought into culture. Gosh, this has been the fastest hour. I'm about 4 minutes out from the show's ending, and I just, is there something that you'd like to share that we weren't able to talk about?
Well, if people are interested in their indigenous heritage and want to find out about Lafayette Head's list that he made, all right, they can look at Chapter 8 in the book Nation Genízara, and it's actually pronounced Nación Genízara. But you know, if you're looking for it in the library or on the bookshelf, look for Nación Genízara or Nation Genízara.
Wow.
And again, Chapter 8 is my chapter. It's a detailed chapter about these cautivos and how they were treated. I went through oral histories and information to find that. And also there's a full list of whose family they were in.
Yes.
And Lafayette's heads list was phenomenal because it named, gave them provides the baptized name, the age when the Indita was brought into the family, and the year that they were purchased and who they were purchased by.
That was so cool to read that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, guys, look, I want to just show you this. Family ties to the early Cuchareños. It's right here. And if you are from Walsenburg, if you're from Southern Colorado, you're in here. Your family was in here. It's almost a certainty. Then you go through here in direct descendants of Jesus Maria Cisneros, Jose Ramon Bustos. Ah, this is so cool, Virginia. I'm not kidding you. I just love these photographs, and I look through these, and you know, I got Duran in my history, and I got Holguin, and I got so many different, you know, names. Oh, here we are, Indian captives in Cucharas. It talks about
Cucharas alone.
Yes, just Cucharas. Captive owners, the captive's name, their age, the tribe they came from, the event, location, date, and the captive's spouse's name. Guys, this is a book absolutely worth picking up. Virginia, where can they find your book?
This should be their first book. The second book should be their Pleas and Petitions. And then the third book would be that 8th chapter in Nación Genízara. These books are available from local and online bookstores. If you're in the Denver area, I have some available. You can contact me, virginia.sanchez@comcast.net. And then Pleas and Petitions is available in ebook form. And to get that ebook form, you would contact universityofcoloradopress.com. And there's some real good prices on the ebooks.
Yeah, guys, and these are some worthwhile reads, and especially if you are trying to find your roots, your culture, and find out about where you came from. What's your story? Because we don't know our story. It has been taken from us. Guys.
It has been taken from us because they were embarrassed, you know? I mean,
Yes.
they lost so much.
Yes.
And you know, there's a lot of embarrassment and hurt there, so they didn't want to pass that part down. But we have such a rich history.
Yes, we do.
And we need to let our children know about this history. And
There's been so much of what I call the internalization of inferior status, and that embarrassment is something that shame is something that was conditioned and almost bred into us because it makes us so that we don't want to discover, we don't want to find
it. When we came into the United States as citizens in 1848, 1850, okay, we were made second-class citizens.
Absolutely.
Because of our language, because of our religion,
yes,
and because of our color.
Guys, we are completely out of time. I wish we had another hour. I just love doing what I do. Remember, guys, our show sponsor is David Ronquillo with the part of his trilogy, Make It Go Away. Virginia, I'm so honored to have you as a guest on this show. I thank you so much for taking time to be with us.
I'm honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Man, keep writing. We'll talk more. And guys, Happy New Year to you. I always say everybody's looking for a hero. If you can't find one, be one. Stay tuned for Paul Chavez and Deep Cuts. Mr. International will be with you in just a few minutes. Have a great day. I love you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Virginia.